Johnny Depp. I think he goes mad at one stage. Does it bother you though, that level of attention?
I don't deal with it very well.
What do you do?
Cry a lot. Then they get really freaked out. It's crazy. It's completely crazy. He's wicked and doesn't do quite as much when he's off camera.
They looked perfect on screen. The daring pirate and the fearless hero sailing through chaos and charm. But behind the cameras of Pirates of the Caribbean, things weren't as effortless as they seemed.
Weirdly, he hasn't asked me to do that on anything. He's asked me to, I need a clap and whistle on things that he's done. He wasn't offering to pay me. He was not happy.
Unbelievable.
I know. It's quite possibly the worst thing that I've ever heard.
Keira Knightley was only 19 when she stepped onto that colossal set beside Johnny Depp, whose unpredictable energy shaped every scene. Years later, she's finally breaking her silence about what it was really like. What did she see? What did she feel? And why is she choosing to speak now, after all this time? Rising star meets a pirate legend. Before she was a household name, Keira Knightley was just a 19-year-old stepping into a world far bigger than she imagined. The year was 2002, and Hollywood was buzzing about Disney's latest gamble, a pirate adventure inspired by a theme park ride. It sounded risky, even silly to some, but for Keira, Pirates of the Caribbean, the Curse of the Black Pearl was the chance of a lifetime. She was fresh off a breakout role in Bend It Like Beckham, and suddenly she was being offered a role opposite Johnny Depp, one of the most unpredictable and magnetic stars in the business. Keira would later admit that she never expected the film to become a global phenomenon. "I thought it would be a fun summer job," she once said. But that summer job would turn into years of sequels, press tours, and the defining role of her early career. Elizabeth Swann, the governor's daughter turned fearless pirate. What she didn't know was that this adventure would also bring challenges that went far beyond the screen. At the time, Johnny Depp was already a Hollywood legend. Known for disappearing into eccentric characters, he was admired and feared in equal measure. His reputation on set was that of a genius who lived in his own rhythm, unpredictable, intense, and at times, untouchable. Keira, in contrast, was still learning how to navigate the politics of a massive studio production. The power difference between them wasn't just about age, it was about legacy. The undeniable chemistry of the characters was already apparent when filming started. Elizabeth Swann's audacity and Captain Jack Sparrow's disorderliness were literally the craziest on-screen waves. Keira played every single scene with strictness and accuracy, while Johnny was a freestyler. For Keira, who was used to the traditional acting style, it was both thrilling and scary. "You never knew what Johnny was going to do next," a crew member once said. He would improvise, push, and test everyone's reactions. That was his magic, and his chaos. Initially, Keira looked up to that unplanned acting. She was really young, influenced, and keen to learn. It would be like being a witness to a live demonstration of charisma when observing Depp act. But as time went by, she felt more and more the presence of the unspoken hierarchy that governed the entire place. Depp was the ruler who could do no wrong. Whenever he made a call or changed a scene, everybody else just went along. A film with tension underneath the surface, nevertheless, went on to be successful beyond belief. Pirates of the Caribbean became an instant blockbuster, and Keira Knightley's star power skyrocketed. Awards nominations, magazine covers, and public opinion, promising her to be one of the brightest talents in Hollywood, came along with her. Still, she had the red carpets and all the great things pressure that came with being the youngest in the team of seasoned professionals. And at the same time, she had to see, and sometimes be, the behavior that she sometimes didn't understand or feel comfortable with. Now looking back at that time, Keira feels like she is standing between two opposing forces, awe and unease. "It was an amazing experience indeed," she told. "But at the same time, I learned very quickly how small you could feel in such a huge machine." That machine was not only the film, it was also the hierarchy, the stardom, and the unwritten laws of silence that held everybody in restraint. What began as an innocent adventure for a young actress aboard the Black Pearl would soon drift into murkier waters, where admiration met uncertainty, and the line between acting and reality began to blur. Captain Jack's aura. When Keira Knightley first met Johnny Depp, she met a legend. At the time, Depp wasn't just an actor. He was the Hollywood enigma, a man who had built his name playing misfits, outsiders, and rebels. His eyes carried a quiet danger, and his voice, that low, slurred drawl, could shift between humor and menace in an instant. To everyone around him, he was both mystery and magnet, a man who drew people in while keeping them guessing. And on the set of Pirates of the Caribbean, that magnetism became its own kind of force. Keira was barely 19, Johnny was 40. Their worlds couldn't have been more different. Depp had decades of fame behind him: Edward Scissorhands, Sleepy Hollow, Donnie Brasco, a career that made him untouchable. When he arrived on set as Captain Jack Sparrow, the crew didn't just see an actor. They saw an icon rewriting the rules of the film as he went. His swagger, his unpredictable improvisations, even his quiet silences between takes, all carried weight. And that weight set the tone for everyone else. By all accounts, Depp's process was part brilliance, part chaos. He reinvented Jack Sparrow entirely, ignoring early scripts and Disney's expectations. He slurred his words, stumbled through lines, and gave the pirate an almost drunken rhythm that left producers nervous at first. But audiences later adored it. Nobody could have played Jack like Johnny, Keira would later say. He took something that could have been a cartoon and made it alive. Yet behind that praise was an awareness of how much power he truly had. On set, when Depp spoke, things stopped. Directors adjusted. Scenes changed. It wasn't out of fear. It was respect mixed with uncertainty. His charm wasn't the warm kind. It was the hypnotic kind that kept everyone slightly off balance. To Keira, that particular aura was both an attraction and a fright at the same time. In interviews after some years, she confessed that most of the time, he was the one with the intensity she was in awe of. Acting against him was like a trial. Every shot a practice outdoor with someone who could never be caught playing the same way twice. Depp would sometimes create wholly new moments with an unpredictable turn of events and introduce humor, uses of his body or mood changes that weren't included in the script. There were moments when such unpredictability turned the set into a place full of life. On the other hand, there were situations in which it bore tension. Not openly, but some crew members confessed that Johnny's moods were the ones that determined the working pace. If he were in the mood, the day would soon be over in laughter and creativity. If he were to be silent, the whole place would be quiet. He was that person who could change the mood without uttering a single word, one insider narrated. Keira was quick to learn and to adjust. She imitated his flashes of creativity, coordinated her vibes with his, and found ways to use his uncertainty as a source of inspiration for her own acting. This adaptability was her shield. Nevertheless, she couldn't help noticing the distance that was coming between them, the way certain people were very careful in dealing with him, as if they feared being overpowered. They were on different sides of the power scale, but she always spoke well of him. Her comments about the past, even now, are still very much measured, respectful, and careful. But the hints are obvious. Depp's allure was not only something to be admired, it was something one had to endure. Their on-screen chemistry was a fact that couldn't be denied. However, off-screen, the domination was evident. Johnny was the leading actor, the main character, the name that had the power to influence the whole production. Keira, even if she was very quickly rising, was still learning how to hold her own in that gravitational field. What she didn't know then was that the charm she admired would, in time, reveal a darker complexity she couldn't unsee. Slivers of unease. As the cameras rolled and the waves crashed against the Black Pearl, there was laughter, music, and movie magic in the making. But beneath the surface, Keira Knightley began to feel something shift, something she couldn't name at first. It wasn't a single incident or confrontation. It was a series of subtle moments, small enough to overlook, yet sharp enough to leave marks. The kind of things that don't make headlines, but stay with you long after the director calls cut. On set, Johnny Depp was the gravitational pull. His charm was intoxicating, but it came with unpredictability. One day, he'd be warm, kind, joking with the crew. The next, he'd be distant, lost in his own world. To a teenager still finding her footing in the industry, this volatility was confusing. Keira admired his talent. How could she not? He was Captain Jack Sparrow, a character no one else could have invented. But that admiration slowly tangled with unease, as she noticed how easily the mood on set could change depending on him. There were days when he'd walk in smiling, and the energy lifted instantly. Other days, the atmosphere tightened. Crew members lowered their voices, eyes darted for cues. Keira remembered how even silence seemed louder when Johnny was having an off day. When the person at the top of the call sheet changes, everything changes, she once said in an interview, not as an accusation, but as an observation learned young. Then there were the jokes, some funny, some not so much. Depp's humor could be dark, biting, and unpredictable. At times, his offhand remarks crossed the line between playful and uncomfortable. Keira would laugh them off, partly out of nerves, partly out of respect for his status. Nobody wanted to be the one who couldn't take a joke. Yet those small moments added up. It was the way boundaries blurred in the name of art, or the way an edgy comment got excused because of who said it. The glamorous aspect of shooting in the Caribbean was also accompanied by the isolation aspect. The long hours of work, heat, and fatigue mixed together to form one experience. There were no separate worlds for the cast and crew, only a small, closed world where rumors circulated very fast and the lack of space was an everyday thing. Keira soon realized how little privacy she had. She observed how everyone treated Depp with high regard, and the crew would be very quick to serve him. At the age of 19, she didn't possess the vocabulary to characterize that difference in power. Instead, she was left with the feeling. At times, she would get the whisper from her gut that something wasn't right. She concentrated on her dialogues, her costume fittings, her fight choreography, anything that could help her stay in control of her small part of the chaos. Her interactions with Johnny came to be nothing less than careful choreography. When he was in character, she matched his energy. When he was cold, she stayed far away. It was not fear, but rather self-preservation. "You get to understand people quickly," she would later admit, "especially if you are young and trying not to step on anyone's foot." Nevertheless, Keira wasn't blind to the truth. She had a knack for telling when the line between acting and real life started to fade away. The scenes that seemed to be part of Jack Sparrow's character, the drunk and charming pirate, were the ones where Depp's unpredictable behavior became not just acting, but real. She would never use the term abusive to characterize her situation. It was not that easy. It was an accumulation of 1,000 minute instances that together created a silent pressure, a sensation that she was in a place where the ground could tip at any moment. What she didn't know was that pirates wouldn't just shape her career. It would shape how she understood power, silence, and the cost of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Scenes that strained. There are moments in every film that test an actor's focus, scenes that blur the line between performance and personal space. For Keira Knightley, Pirates of the Caribbean had more than a few of those. The production was massive, the stakes enormous, and the cameras rarely stopped rolling. But behind the breathtaking sword fights and sweeping sea views, there were takes that left her unsettled, emotionally drained, and sometimes unsure of where professionalism ended and discomfort began. From the start, Johnny Depp's creative process was unlike anyone else's. He liked to experiment, to twist a scene until it felt alive, even if that meant going off script. At times, his improvisations were brilliant, the kind of unpredictable moments that made Captain Jack Sparrow iconic. But for Keira, those same moments could also feel intrusive. You never quite knew what would happen when the cameras started, one crew member recalled. He'd change tone, add lines, or move closer than anyone expected. Everyone just went along with it. One scene in particular became a quiet test of her composure. The script called for a close exchange between Jack and Elizabeth, playful, layered with tension. But when Depp altered the energy mid-scene, leaning further into the flirtation than rehearsed, it caught her off guard. Keira didn't break character. She stayed calm, delivered her lines, and powered through. When the director yelled "cut," she laughed it off like a pro. But later, she admitted the scene shifted in a way that wasn't planned. It wasn't scandalous, just unsettling. A reminder that spontaneity sometimes came at her expense. Other days, the strain wasn't about physical closeness, but the atmosphere itself. Depp's moods could swing sharply. Some mornings, he'd arrive full of charm, teasing everyone in his path. Other times, he'd drift through the set quietly and unreadably. When that happened, the entire crew adjusted their rhythm. Keira often described walking into a scene like stepping onto uncertain terrain. She never knew which version of her co-star she'd be acting opposite. The same was true of the exhausting media coverage. The first film's success created a situation where each sequel would have to bear more pressure, more interviews, bigger expectations, more gossip about her with Depp and co-star Orlando Bloom. But Keira was not different from the others who were always smiling and giving sound bites. She was just doing the hard thing, the job, trying to find her way through the intricacy of co-starring with a man whose charisma would overshadow everyone in the room. It was difficult not to get lost in his orbit, revealed one source. He had that kind of pull. The audience could not deny their chemistry. Nevertheless, off-screen, it was to be worked on. Keira mastered the art of conveying respect while practicing restraint, to King Kong-style walk on Depp's energy without getting it. She turned the situation in her favor, as the unpredictable pulling force on the set. She could be overpowered by the next minute to use the strength as others of her did the other way around. She was incredibly composed for someone so young, said a member of the production team. You could see her choosing when to speak and when to remain silent. It was a kind of armor. It wasn't the scenes that were difficult, but rather the silence that followed them. The movie business rewarded perseverance, the power to ignore, to laugh rather than inquire, to wear discomfort as a mask. Keira did it all not because she was inexperienced, but rather because she realized how easily a young actress's reputation could be ruined in Hollywood. After many years, when she reflected on it, she didn't focus on anger or remorse. What remained with her were those delicate lessons regarding power, control, and the price of being easy to work with. The most taxing scenes not only challenged her acting, they taught her when to speak, when to protect her boundaries, and how to stay steady in the storm of someone else's chaos. The costs of silence. In Hollywood, silence often speaks the loudest. For Keira Knightley, that silence became both a shield and a burden. During the Pirates of the Caribbean years, she said very little publicly about her experiences on set. She praised the cast, the crew, and Johnny Depp's extraordinary talent. But what she didn't say, The pauses between her words told their own story. Silence for her wasn't ignorance, it was survival. Keira was 19, working among seasoned men in an environment where charm and hierarchy often blurred together. The unspoken rule was simple: keep the peace, play along, and don't make waves. She watched how others navigated Johnny's moods, how the crew laughed off his unpredictability or justified his behavior as part of his process. It wasn't malicious, it was systemic. The industry was built on the idea that brilliance excused discomfort, and young actors were expected to endure it. Keira once said in an interview years later that she felt lucky to have worked with Johnny, and she meant it. But her tone, cautious and deliberate, hinted at a truth she couldn't fully articulate then. She respected his artistry, yes, but also learned early how much power can distort normal boundaries. It wasn't a matter of confrontation. It was the quiet calculation of when speaking up might cost more than staying quiet. Every young actress knows that calculation. One wrong comment, one misunderstood quote, could define a career. Keira had just started building hers. She was starring in blockbusters, walking red carpets, and being labeled Hollywood's newest it girl. That kind of spotlight didn't forgive dissent, so she smiled in interviews, deflected tough questions, and redirected praise toward the ensemble. It was easier that way, safer. However, the silence has its own costs. It can gradually erode one's self-esteem, turn admiration into fear, and even make the lightest of interactions feel like a burden. Keira became overly conscious of her image, taking great care about her words, movements, and the people she associated with. Each revelation about Johnny's quirks or his intensity was a reminder to her that her identity would always be intertwined with his, whether she liked it or not. When it was years later, Keira still had to speak about her Pirates experience and did so with gratitude, but also delivered a cautionary note. "It was a great learning curve," she said, "but it was a weird world to grow up in." She did not go into details, but the way she put it was a conscious one. The weirdness was not about the celebrity status, but rather about learning to survive in a pecking order where the loudest opinions were hardly ever questioned. There is a tragic aspect to the very same thing. The glamour and all that, the franchise had to pay for something less obvious: her soothing, her being spontaneous, and perhaps even a little bit of her being youthful. She matured quicker than she intended, not because of the fame, but because she had to master the art of emotional diplomacy. "You had to know how to keep people happy," she later recalled her early days in Hollywood. "That's how you survived." The irony is that Pirates of the Caribbean turned her into a star, and at the same time taught her the downside of fame. The cost of silence wasn't measured in scandal or headlines. It was measured in the weight she carried, the knowledge of things she couldn't say, and the grace it took to stay silent anyway. Why she speaks now. For nearly 2 decades, Keira Knightley kept her memories of the Pirates of the Caribbean years sealed behind carefully chosen words and polite smiles. She never joined the noise, never fueled rumors, never took part in public feuds. But in recent years, something shifted. The silence she once wore like armor began to feel heavier than the truth. And when she finally spoke, measured, thoughtful, and honest, it wasn't out of anger, it was out of clarity. Keira grew up in an era when young women in Hollywood were expected to be agreeable. When she first filmed Pirates, she was barely 19, navigating a male-dominated set, surrounded by producers, executives, and co-stars who had far more power than she did. Speaking out back then wasn't a realistic option. It was career risk. But time has a way of reshaping courage. With age, distance, and a changed industry, Keira found a new voice, one that didn't ask for permission. When she reflected on those early years, her tone was calm but revealing. "It was a very strange thing to be a teenager in that world," she admitted in one interview. She didn't describe harassment or hostility. What she described was imbalance, the way people deferred to Johnny Depp, how his charisma controlled the rhythm of the set, how she learned to navigate egos instead of emotions. Keira's decision to speak wasn't about revisiting pain. It was about context. She had watched the conversations around Hollywood evolve, the #MeToo movement, the discussions of power dynamics, the slow unmasking of what women had quietly endured for decades. It made her realize that what once felt normal was never truly acceptable. Her younger self might not have had the tools to challenge it, but her older self refused to keep pretending that silence equaled peace. "I was very little," she gently recalled during a recent reflection. "And when you are little in such a surrounding, you become an adapter rather than a questioner." That one sentence alone was quite powerful. It was not only about one co-actor, it was about a whole system that made discomfort normal under the cover of artistry. Johnny Depp was also a child of that system, who was still brilliant in the eyes of others, though sometimes even his behavior would make them feel uncomfortable. Keira's reflections were rooted in empathy, not just for her younger self, but also for other people who have gone through the same experience of being silent. In fact, through her speaking, she was not only rewriting history, but also reclaiming her part in it. "It's not about blame," she remarked in another interview. "It's about honesty. It's about saying, this is what it was like, without disguising it as something else." Her words were powerful, not because of their content, but because of the manner in which they were delivered, with restraint, grace, and conviction. There was no use of shock techniques from her side. Rather, she presented truth as a viewpoint. She recognized the difficulty of working with Johnny Depp. He was at times both inspiring and difficult, magnetic and volatile. "It was a very peculiar combination of admiration and discomfort," she remarked. "The attraction was so strong that you could not help being involved, but at the same time, you were aware that you were very close to the flames." Speaking up now, after all these years, is not a rebellion, but rather a way of getting closure. And as she breaks her silence, she's not just talking about the past, she's rewriting what strength in Hollywood sounds like: legacy, reactions, and moving forward. When Keira Knightley finally opened up about her time on the Pirates of the Caribbean set, the world listened closely. Not because she was making accusations or seeking attention, but because her reflections carried something deeper: perspective. In an industry obsessed with sensationalism, her honesty was quiet, measured, and undeniably human. What she said wasn't explosive. What made it powerful was how much she didn't have to say. Fans were quick to revisit the old films, rewatching her scenes with Johnny Depp through a new lens. Some said her words shed light on what it meant to be a young woman surrounded by fame, power, and unpredictability. Others defended Depp, interpreting her reflections as nostalgia rather than criticism. But what most agreed on was that Keira's voice, calm, reflective, and wise, offered a necessary reminder of how Hollywood once worked behind closed doors. Her comments didn't spark outrage, they sparked awareness. She wasn't rewriting the Pirates' legacy, but reframing it. For many, the franchise had always been about adventure, fantasy, and escapism. But Keira's insight revealed the real-world dynamics behind the camera. It reminded people that even the biggest blockbusters are built on human interactions. Some brilliant, some complicated, and some quietly painful. Johnny Depp's fans, protective as ever, dissected her every sentence. But even they couldn't deny her grace. She never attacked him, never used his name to stir controversy. Instead, she spoke from experience, about imbalance, not betrayal. Her reflection became part of a broader conversation about what it means to grow up in a system that rewards silence and punishes honesty. Basically, the narrative of Keira has become intertwined with the pirates theme. It also heavily reflected the young ladies belonging to her era, those who were entering Hollywood at the time when silent was the only mode of expression, those who were experiencing discomfort and resigning to it as part of the job. For every Keira's comment captured by reporters, there were at least hundreds of actresses who nodded silently in agreement, having been in her shoes. Through her roughened voice, she had revealed the unspoken pains of many actors and actresses. Moreover, as she was speaking, she was doing something that was beyond this world, changing her own legacy. Keira Knightley was no longer the actress who made a great impression by her role as Elizabeth Swann, the hero confined in a corset who was partnered with a charming pirate. She had become a woman who society would eventually need, who would be able to confront her defining moment and speak the truth about it, no matter how complicated the case might be. Later interviews showed her to be a thankful person rather than a bitter one. That period was a complete education for me. How to adjust to new circumstances, how to defend my interests, and how to express myself, she mentioned. The past was not the main issue. Rather, it was about good comprehension. She mentioned that the movie Pirates opened up the whole world for him, but also let her see how temporary that fame could be when the power was not equally shared. Nowadays, Keira's films are still thought-provoking, with her choosing to work only on those that tackle the complexity of women in a man's world. Atonement, The Imitation Game, and Colette are among the films that depict her taking on more challenging roles after learning to set limits. "I prefer parts where women are in control of their stories," she has been quoted as saying, and that theme seems to be the end of her pirate story. Keira Knightley's story reminds us, fame doesn't erase friction, and silence often hides the cost. What she revealed changes how we view not just pirates, but every set built on power imbalances. What do you believe happened behind those iconic scenes? And what do we owe to actors who finally speak? Leave your thoughts below. If you want more deep dives into untold Hollywood stories, like, subscribe, and watch what's next on your screen.